Everyone can hear me okay? I take it, yes. Melissa, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So I don't know if there's a presentation, or is Matt going? Matt, can you load the presentation?
One moment, please.
Okay. And as Matt said, while we're waiting for that, I really would welcome you to use the chat box to engage. We find that incredibly helpful as we're presenting in these teleconference settings, that if you have a question, we'd love to answer it as we're going through it. We'll also leave time at the end for questions. But sometimes having those questions during the session really brings relevance. And if I ask a question, I welcome you to please put a response in the chat room as well. So, you know, today we're going to talk about during and post-pandemic tips, tools, and ideas. If you want to go to the next slide. Really what I want to focus on, and what Melissa and I are going to share with you today, is really the planning, the reflecting, and the tips, tools, and ideas. And again, we hope that you can extract some information that becomes very useful for you as you're navigating an unprecedented time right now that we're all dealing with. There's a lot of uncertainty, both in what we're dealing with right now as well as what's to come in the future. And so planning is probably one of the most important things we personally tell our clients always, whether we're in a pandemic situation or a crisis situation. If you have had a plan from the beginning, it allows you to flex and adjust a lot faster when situations arise and when crises are upon us. So we're going to start talking with that in mind first. So if we want to move to the next screen, one more. Planning, so always being ready. I cannot stress this enough. I think one of the things we work really hard with our clients to do is to create a long-term 5-year plan for marketing. Our agency is very focused on becoming a partner of organizations and really looking at things not only as an immediate need, but how are we growing the business long term. And a lot of times financial strains, whether you're in a pandemic or not, can cause concern during that 5-year plan. And so it's really important that we look at a financial long-term plan from a marketing perspective for a business. And when we look at that, and when you look at developing that for your own companies, it's really important to keep that vision and those goals in mind for that long term. But then we really work diligently on short-term plans, and those are needed to be evaluated frequently. We really recommend being flexible with those, and that's really allows you to move quickly in a crisis. So we look at short-term anywhere from a 6-month to a year at a time, and it allows us to test and evaluate. We do not set it and forget it. We don't recommend that in any kind of marketing plan. So I think it's important as you look at your marketing plans to really look at that from how do your short-term goals meet that 5-year plan, and how does that look from a revenue standpoint for your business. And what we like to look at is, you know, from a strategic marketing plan, you need to be very business centric when you're looking at marketing, because no one wants to do marketing in a shotgun approach. They want it to have a direct impact on your business. So that could come in a lot of different ways. It could come in awareness. It can come in sales. It can come through expansion of market sectors. So really understanding your business and your audience and what sectors are you really looking at for your business, and how do you grow those sectors? What are your products and services, and what categories are you in currently, and where do you want to go long term? And this is really going to help you develop your audience and develop your strategies around your marketing plan. So I can't say enough about being ready and planning from the very beginning, because having a good plan and a good strategic business plan will allow you to put marketing initiatives together. One thing I always say is, you know, regardless of what industry we're working with, if you don't understand your products, if you don't understand your services, if you don't understand your audience and what their needs are, all the great, and you don't have your internal processes in place to be able to execute on a marketing plan, all that great marketing really isn't going to be effective. So making sure you have a plan. And, you know, hopefully you've had a plan to date, but if you haven't, you should be using this time to make sure you're developing that. If you want to go to the next slide. You know, I say now is not the time to do nothing, but I want to clarify this with everybody. You know, we're all facing different issues. And I think one thing that I said earlier is for sure we're all in uncharted territories. I've learned over the years, though, that going silent just isn't the answer. Marketing can take a lot of different forms, and we're going to talk about that. So it doesn't always have to be about spending a huge amount of dollars. If you've planned and if you've done things right, the best part about marketing is it can take a lot of different channel distributions for you. And I think that's a really important part of understanding that planning process. We've also realized over time that in previous downturns, those who've spent on marketing have grown market share 3 times faster. So if you have a plan and you have really looked at where are you going and you understand your audience, now is not the time to be silent. Now is the time to really drive that awareness. And we're going to talk a little bit later about some tips and tools on how to best communicate your message and be relevant today, and utilize this opportunity to help you grow your brand, grow your awareness, and really impact your business for the long term, because there's a lot of changes that are happening right now that we also see will potentially stay for the long term. So being positioned properly now is really important. And again, I think those who were around and in business during, you know, the early 90s, you know, recession, there was 5-year sales advantage of 25% for those that did do marketing versus their competitors. It is a known fact that going silent really isn't effective for your business. And your lowest hanging fruit is your current customer, your current audience. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but having a database and understanding who your customers are, if you do not have that, you really need to be building that. Communicating to your current customers during this time particularly is absolutely critical. So if you want to go to the next slide. So all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this, but when we look at marketing mix and strategy, it's important that as you're developing that plan that I talked about earlier, that you really do it in an integrative marketing mix strategy. So all of these bubbles and all of these areas may not fit for you, but what you need to decide is how do you best create a mix that most effectively drives your brand awareness, drives and generates leads, and creates a sales conversion for you. And sales can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can mean membership growth. It can mean more accounts. It can mean more sales from a consumer service standpoint. So that comes in a lot of different forms. But this is really important. So we look at earned media, which is, you know, our public relations side of things. This is a really important area for you to really be developing and creating your story and telling your story. Nobody can tell your story about your product, about your business, about your services better than you can. And having a relationship with the media, I know we have some media on here, but on the call today, but having a relationship with your media is absolutely critical, both from a paid and an earned standpoint. I think our media can be our friends, and a lot of times we think of media, in different ways for us, but utilizing media to help us tell our stories, I think, is absolutely critical. But we also look at this in terms of community relations and events, and I know events they come in a lot of different forms. What we're seeing right now is a lot of non-traditional events happening, a lot of Facebook Live, a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of seminars that are still happening, but over our teleconferencing, like we're doing today. These are still really important, and the messages and the information we're sharing really has to be relevant to what the needs are, whether that's during COVID or during a holiday season or another time of year. We need to make sure our content is relevant and that it's connecting with what we're doing. And influencer relations, crisis communications, all really important. As we look at partnerships and social media right now, and Melissa's going to talk about this in a little bit, is really where budgets right now are. The audience is online, and because they're not out there, they're online, and using this time to really test and optimize and be able to utilize dollars effectively. If you're not utilizing social media in some form, we really encourage you to look at utilizing that into your mix and testing different platforms that you may not have used before, whether that's through organic or paid. It's really important, but more so than ever right now, content. So again, Melissa's going to talk about what's happening out there in content, but it's information overload right now. So content is really important, but it's not only about how you say it, but it's about what you say and where you say it. So being able to understand how to create content that is relevant is absolutely important. Just ongoing, how does your brand tell its story, and how is it relevant? How are you aiding those audiences or consumers? How are you developing content that's meaningful to them? How does your product fit into the mix of what they need right now or during the time that you're developing? You always have to be adjusting and moving your content and making sure that it's relevant. And we highly encourage testing content messaging in the social space. Video, I think, is absolutely critical. If you're not doing video, this is how content is being received right now. You need to formulate that into your mix. We've seen that with a lot of clients now. Video has become an important part of their daily content and messaging. And I also think really important is, we're seeing that now, and some of the services that we've started to create is creating video affordably, making sure that it's not a huge production every time you're doing it, but you still have quality video and that it's informational. I think those are really important, and content in terms of blogs and thought leadership. Incentive marketing, we're seeing a lot of that right now. A lot of different brands are offering incentives that are relevant to them during this time. And I think that's a really important part of your strategy. And then paid media and media integration, all really important. I can tell you a couple of little examples that I think are important. One thing from our manufacturing side of things, our clients, one thing that we did from a content standpoint that then can be utilized across different medias is we were able to do a global message on COVID-19 and the impact it's having on the operations around the globe. What operations are open? When do we see things happening? And we were able to video the WebEx and then edit it into a shorter video, and then we embedded that into an email communications to our database of customers. Again, we've been developing for 5 years a really solid database for that client. Prior to that, they didn't have any one place that they were housing their database of clients and updating that. You know, CRMs come in a lot of different forms and a lot of businesses, and just because you may not have an expensive CRM doesn't mean you shouldn't be keeping a database of your customers, because your best means of communication is direct to your customer. Customer retention is absolutely critical. And we had so many responses from that email to our customer. We actually personalized it to each individual from the president of the organization. That staying in tune and keeping customers updated right now is absolutely critical. They want to know that you're in business and that you're okay. Census work that we're doing, we've found right now that, you know, a lot of the census work was going to be via grassroots. We've had to shift and help the communities around the state redirect their funding to the digital space and utilize it in an effective way to reach our hard to count populations. We've seen quite a lot of that. We've moved to OTT, digital broadcast, Facebook, Instagram, and a lot of collateral is still relevant. So utilizing collateral and print to supplement things that are still happening out there, whether it's school districts that are providing food to those students that are still in need, whether it's healthcare and food agencies, still working with our partners and creating those partnerships through influencer marketing is really important as well right now. For Consociate Health, we're seeing quite a bit of movement on the LinkedIn. They are, you know, a resource and a thought leader in the insurance and healthcare arena. And it's part of their plan right now that we've implemented is making sure they're helping others navigate information overload right now during this time. And from a university setting, we're seeing a lot of universities across the state and across the US that we're working with really focusing on developing their brand and their strategies right now. We're doing quite a bit of focus groups online. We're doing strategy setting, brand positioning, messaging strategy right now because we need to be ready for when COVID is over. Things don't just end. So being ahead of the game and making sure we're ready from a positioning standpoint, whether that's endowment or recruitment, we've got to keep moving. So if you want to go to the next slide. And I don't know if anyone else has any other things that maybe they could share in the chat that they've done that they've seen really impact. Those are just a few from my perspective that have been really important things lately or things that rise to the top. But again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we've talked about it, but you need to reflect and say to yourself, are you meeting your goals? Just because we're in the middle of this crisis, you need to make sure you sit down and understand what are your goals. Do you have a content plan? Do you have a messaging strategy? Are you communicating with your customers? Do you know who your customers are? I'm surprised a lot of times when we go in with clients, they don't have a database or a really good understanding of who their customers are. Or, you know, their memberships at a deeper level. This is really important, whether that's doing surveys, whether that's communicating, creating a database with them, really better understanding your customers. The more information you have, the more it's going to help you develop content that's relevant. Are you analyzing that content regularly? What's working? Are you testing? What's not? What tactics are driving the most engagement? And is that engagement converting for you in some way that's meaningful? Are you delivering against your KPIs, which is what we all want? What are your key performance indicators? How do you know? What does success look like? I always say begin with the end in mind. What sectors of your business are doing well and why? What can you do to affect the ones that aren't performing well? And what industry trends might be impacting your business beyond COVID, positively and negatively? Asking these questions and guiding yourself is going to be really important in knowing what channels from the last slide are the right ones for your business. So you can go to the next slide. And Melissa's going to take over and she's going to talk about what's happening out there right now, reflecting on the business and what we're seeing in the industry right now.
Yeah, so if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. Well, you know, as we talk about planning and shifting, you kind of really always need to be aware of what's happening. Obviously, with more people staying at home with the pandemic, everyone is shifting to digital. Daytime viewership is up 16%. Social media browsing is up 10 to 20% depending upon the platform. You know, with people home, billboards and geofencing tactics are not happening. You know, they're seeing nobody's really seeing the billboards for the reach that you bought, or, you know, with events being canceled, you can't do the geo-targeting to be able to remarket to them. So it's really important to understand that digital is where you're going to start to reach people, and that is what is happening across the landscape. You know, one of the things to note also is, you know, they're spending more time with devices, but it's across devices. So tablets are up, mobile phone usage is up, laptop computers are up, gaming devices, a lot more gaming is happening. The streaming services that are integrated, you know, smartphone, smart TV, all of those streaming services are up tremendously as well. So really important to understand, you know, not only is it shifting to digital, but where is it shifting? What devices are people using? How are they using them? So really understanding that it's important to know that as we go into the next slide. You know, these digital activities that are happening in April are going to stay. You know, it's projected that behavior is going to continue. And one of the big things to watch is the streaming services. So, you know, over the top. So it's not the cable, it's not TV, but when you look at advertising across those platforms that are Hulu and their Netflix and Peacock and Sling and Disney Plus that just came out, that, you know, a lot of those started also offering sort of free 30-day trials and getting people into their audience. So the lift on those types of things, that's what's actually leading the way in what is being consumed from an activity standpoint, and that's going to continue to stay elevated from what it was. They're also spending more time and longer periods of time on social media. That's another one driving. And again, when you look forward post-pandemic, it's estimated to also continue to stay up. So if you weren't previously advertising or have organic social content, it's important to start to think about how do you develop that and how do you start leveraging that. Messenger services, obviously you can't go visit people. So messenger services are up significantly, and that starts to be a trend where people maybe didn't connect as frequently and now they're connecting more often. Again, another one that's going to stay up in post-pandemic times. You know, mobile apps, gaming's going to stay up. So some of these go down a little bit more, like they'll still stay up. One of the other things is the more listening to more podcasts and the music streaming. That's another one that's going to stay elevated to think about in the future, developing more of that type of content. So on the next slide, we go into a little bit more about the fact that social media is up by age group. So you think about, you know, usually younger people tend to be the ones that are on certain platforms. Older people are on other platforms. What's interesting is that, and when I say that, I mean younger, they're on Snapchat, they're on Instagram, older, you know, more Facebook, et cetera. Well, across age groups, social media usage is up. And that's really interesting because you usually don't see that 55 to 64 plus increase as much. But it's probably obviously driven by what is happening, and that's a way for people to connect and share beyond just the messenger apps and things that they're doing. On the next slide, when you look at social and you look at what platforms are used the most, Facebook is still at the top. And during this time, it's even higher than YouTube. So a lot of times we'll look and you'll see YouTube with the content will be closer to Facebook. Right now it's a little bit higher, but Facebook is a little bit higher, but YouTube is still up there. And a lot of that goes back to video content that Kara was talking about earlier, right? So there's a lot more sharing, there's a lot more content out there. And when you think about the video sharing and things that are going on, there is as she mentioned, it doesn't have to be high production. There's a standard that's lessened right now. You don't have to be as worried about it being a high production video if you're going to put it out there. People understand what's happening. And the authentic insight, the authentic feel that comes from a non-totally produced video is actually resonating with people right now. So when we get into some of the tips and trends, we'll talk a little bit more about being authentic and being real. So it goes back to, you don't have to have that high production video in this time. People aren't expecting that. They're just expecting you to communicate with them in a real way. On the next slide, one of the things that I want to talk about is access by device. So when you are creating ads, keep in mind mobile ads are important. A lot of times companies don't think, they develop one ad size and they're putting it out there for desktop and it doesn't translate then to mobile. So Facebook access by device is still owned highly by mobile. So when you think about, Facebook being where people are on social, make sure you're advertising, make sure that your ads are mobile friendly. Because the worst thing that can happen is your ad gets cut off and it doesn't present well. So want to make sure that everybody understands when you're developing ad sizes that you're taking the mobile experience into account. And then on the next slide, it talks about from an advertising spend across all of the social platforms, they're up. The one that's up the most is Twitter. So second one from the far right. So Twitter is up 14%. When you look at that and you look at the fact that we're in this COVID pandemic, it's not surprising. I'm sure it's surprising to many of you who think, how often is Twitter used, but Twitter and the purpose of Twitter is about news. So knowing that is trending at a higher rate of increase in advertising, there's a reason for it because, it's a news cycle and that's where it's relevant. So if you're not on Twitter, now would be a time to maybe test getting a Twitter account, testing messaging, testing and building your audience to see what's happening, follow people and see how your messages start to resonate. This is a time that would be ideal to start to test that as a platform if you're not on it. And then on the next slide, this is the last little data point that I have, is what's happening from an e-commerce interest, right? So this should not, again, necessarily be surprising with more people being at home. E-commerce, what's up? What's driving the increases for April are food and groceries, and then your household items. So those are definitely leading what's happening. So what do you do with that? How can you, when you think about e-commerce, what products do you have that you can help think differently of your services and talk to people? Kara had an example we were talking about the other day when we were building this. She's got a family member that has a brewing company, Huss Brewing. And one of the things they were able to do, because they buy in bulk, is actually buy bulk items that are short on supply and people are having a hard time doing it, almost convert themselves to a grocery store. So how do you start to think differently, think out of the box with your products and services or your business and how you can help in the community? And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward into the tips and tools, but starting to think about the landscape and what's happening in consumer behavior. Who are your consumers? How are your consumers being affected by this? Are there things that you can be doing that can support what's going on and what's happening? One of the things I just want to stop and kind of check, I'm not sure if there have been any questions coming in.
Melissa,
Yes,
the way I set up the meeting, people can only submit questions to me, and then I will forward them to either
okay.
you or Kara.
Okay, I
And
see one. Sorry, as I was talking, I probably missed one. How many social media platforms do you
okay.
recommend a business use? I recommend the business use as many platforms that are relevant based on their audience. So, you know, if you're, I think Facebook is a no-brainer. You should definitely be on Facebook just because of the sheer number of people that are on there, and it is across age ranges. You know, if you're targeting more of the millennial generation, you need to make sure that you're on Instagram. If you're looking in that younger, early millennial, you need to be on Snapchat. So it's not like a flat answer of you need to be on X number. It depends on what your target is and what you're looking to do. LinkedIn is going to be a B2B model. You know, Twitter is, as I mentioned before, for your news cycle. So you need to understand your audience, your messaging, what you're trying to talk about, and pick the right platform based on your strategy.
And I think, I don't know if I'm on mute or not, but I also just want to, again, reiterate the content part of that. So every platform, saying the same thing on every platform is not the best strategy. Making sure that your message is relevant on that platform. So thinking through how your content and your message changes on each platform is really important.
Yeah, each platform has to have a strategy, and your content, as Kara's saying, has to match that, and it has to be geared toward your audience.
We did have another quick question come in, which says, besides LinkedIn, what are the best platforms for B2B?
Well, from a social perspective, you know, LinkedIn is really your B2B. I would go back to what Kara said. From a recruit, you know, I think advertising. So if you're looking at, if you're selling, you know, there's ways that you could target business on Facebook. So there are certainly things that you could do from interests and things on that you can select when you're on Facebook to narrow that down. But really, going back to what Kara said, you know, if you have an email database, you know, I would, or if you don't, you need to be building that. So looking at Google and what are people that you target, businesses you target then, you know, from search keywords. I would probably look at that, but make sure that you're driving somewhere that you can then build that database, generate your leads, make sure that your website, if you're targeting businesses, does your website have any tracking on it? There's tools out there that can track who's coming into your website, that can be a lead generation, so that then your sales team can reach back out to people within that business. So really, you know, I would go into more of the Google paid at that point, but make sure that you're not just spending the money, but that from a strategic standpoint, you're understanding who's coming in so that you can build that, whether you're collecting information from them, offering them a white paper as an incentive to give their contact information so that you can reach out. So there's a lot of different things that you can do from that perspective then.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, again, database, I can't stress that enough, having a customer database. Also, like Melissa said, you know, making sure that your website has the tools on it from an analytics standpoint. There's a lot of tools out there that can help you know who's coming to your website, you know, making sure you have landing pages. If you're doing paid campaigns, you're driving them to a landing page so that you can understand the analytics and remarket to those individuals. I think all of this is a really important part of that strategy, even from a B2B standpoint. I think I can't stress that enough. We do quite a bit in the B2B space, and LinkedIn tends to be our primary. We also use Twitter from a news and information standpoint. I think that's a really important part of it as well. And PR, just press and earned media. Thought leadership, making sure that that we're writing and pitching global stories that impact our businesses and are driving our customers, associations and partnership groups. That's another really big B2B, is working with our partner organizations. So in the manufacturing industry, the relationships we have with the Illinois Manufacturers Association, the presence we do in that. And again, it's not just one thing, it's the mix of a strategy.
Thank you.
Yep, if you want to go to the next slide. We're going to go through, we're running through on time here, and we've been giving tips and tools along the way. So some of this is going to be reiterating some of the things that we just said. So for the next slide, just remembering that your marketing is fluid and that one thing isn't the answer. You have to have an approach that's integrated and strategic, and really thinking through your strategic plan before you start marketing is important. And that's really why we spent that time on planning up front. You know, one of the reasons I started this business is because I was in the business industry, and being able to help businesses build a business plan and integrate a marketing strategy is probably one of the most important steps you can do. I think if you take nothing else away, it's build a plan, have a strategy. It's really important. And it's really important that, you know, even in the B2B space and the B2C space, that you merge your marketing strategy with your sales strategy, and that those two teams are working together. We see a lot of businesses, particularly in the B2B space, where sales and marketing are not connected. They aren't working in tandem. They're not pushing the wheel together. I think it's really important that you work on bridging that gap, that those two teams need to meet regularly. You need to understand what's happening from a sales perspective in order to really have an effective marketing plan. Because at the end of the day, marketing is building brand awareness, but it's also helping drive customer and sales as well. So it's really important that those things work together, and adjust your plan. You know, things aren't happening right now in person, but there's a lot of things happening virtually. It is a great time to be testing the virtual platforms. You know, things like, you know, out of home, billboards, those aren't going away. They're all really important mediums and channels for distribution. But now's the time to look at other platforms as well. You know, I always say, Stephen Covey's, it takes 66 days to change a habit. Well, we're going to be at this stay-at-home order for 66 days, probably here pretty soon. I think, what are we at, 50 right now, or close to it? So these habits aren't going away, and that's the data that Melissa was showing you. And so making sure you understand these platforms and that you're utilizing them is really important. And moving your budget, if you have a budget, you know, making sure that you're using it effectively, and really looking at partnerships and how are you doing things. You know, this is just an example of, I had already talked about this, but some of the census work that we're doing, you know, things are still happening, and there is still room for collateral and print materials. We're just using them in different ways and using our resources and partnerships. If you want to go to the next slide. Putting your customers first. You know, this should be all the time. Your low-hanging fruit is customer retention, member retention, making sure the people that are brand loyal remain brand loyal. Be the guiding brand, be present and available for them, and be authentic. Melissa talked about this. What you say and how you say it is so important, and making sure they're building trust in you. Be philanthropic. You know, people have, you know, there's a lot happening out there right now, and, you know, making sure you are helping your customers during this time. And in my mind, you should be philanthropic all the time. It is a rising value in our organization, and giving back to those who give to you is something that you should make part of your brand, and make it authentic in who you are, and don't just do it to get something from it. It's not a give and get approach. You need to do it because it's meaningful and it's relevant to helping the communities that helped your business be where you're at today. Don't try to sell too hard. You should never try to sell too hard, whether that's now or later. You know, you want your products to serve a need. They have a demand. You need to understand that. You need to understand your audience. And provide customers what they want. You should always be doing that. Let them know right now that you're still in business, that they're mindful of what the economic situation is, but we need to be communicating to them. Again, if you don't have a database, please use this time to start building one, or figure out how you're going to integrate that, because you really need to be communicating directly with them. How do they access your products? How do they reach you? They want to know all these things right now. When are you open? What's happening with COVID? Are your programs still going to be going on? A lot of this you don't know, but they still want information on a regular basis. And again, content, really making sure you're working on your content messaging. Well, we can't stress enough how important a content strategist is to a team. Identify somebody within your organization, or utilize an outside source. Get content that's meaningful. It's an art. Writing content is an art, and doing it in a way that's authentic is important. Using an empathetic tone right now is something, you'll see happening across the way, making sure people, know your brand, understands your audience. How can you get them, how can you help them be more productive and more efficient during these times? I'll give an example. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Rent the Runway. It's a online shopping for renting clothes and sending them back. Well, I think what they're doing right now is incredible. They have a great program for just meaningful information to their customers. They're constantly aware of their audience, what they're doing right now, how they're doing work, and being able to provide incentives to them, being able to talk to them about different tips and techniques for online conferencing, how their image really, whether it's in a Zoom meeting or in person, can affect business. We all know that image is a really important part, whether that's your personal image or your brand image. It's a really important part of who you are. Giving incentives right now, helping financially during this time so they don't lose their customers. You're seeing that a lot with these brands out there, and I think that's really important. This isn't a time to just push your brand. It's also a time to reflect on how your brand provides value and helps people be more productive, more efficient, provide services that they're in need of. That's what we're looking at right now. But understanding your brand, and really, I was talking about the universities right now. We're seeing it even across communities. Who are you and what's your brand? Not just what's your logo, but what's your messaging strategy? What's your promise that you and your employees are giving? Making sure that you know what that is and you're communicating that strategically is really important. If you want to go to the next slide.
Do you want to do the
Frito example
video example?
Right. Yeah, that'd be great if it works.
Just a moment.
Or if you want, Matt, you know, you're going to be sending this out, they can kind of view that later if you want. I know we're running up against the clock here.
So would you like me to take it, or?
Yeah, let's just go back. We can, you know, you'll send this out and they can watch it. Really, the Frito-Lay commercials is just an example of how they were able to flex during this time, and how their brand is creating really a presence and an empathetic presence, and really positioning their company. So I think it's just—
And it was about the people and how they're helping. So it just reiterates that messaging.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to include the link by itself.
Okay.
Just to make sure that everybody gets it. But there's your next slide.
Yeah, and just, you know, don't lose sight of reassuring your customers and your employees. Let's not forget about internal communications. I don't know if, you know, we use Facebook Workplace, so you don't have to have Facebook to be a workplace, but we use that as a communication tool for our employees. So we have a separate group that we've created within our workplace, and that is for COVID information. So any new rules or processes or HR required things, making sure our employees across the globe are informed first, and our customers second. That's the most important thing. We really value our employees. They're our #1 asset. Keeping them employed right now is critical. And I think that's important for everybody, you know. And it's a tough thing right now. There's a lot of opportunities out there for grants and funding and things like that to help you, but it's tough. It's really hard. And for different businesses, it's even harder. And so I think reassuring your customers and your employees needs to be a #1 thing you're doing right now. And then letting them know, you know, just that you care, that you're providing value. It's more critical than ever right now that you focus on your, you know, I think of my employees and my customers as my family. So I treat them like I would my own family. And it's important that you do that and you think like that, because that's what's going to help reassure them. Your business doesn't succeed without them, and they need you right now as much as you need them. So listening and taking care of them is important. This gives you some examples. Melissa pulled just, you know, Busey in your own backyard and some of the things that they're doing. Unbelievable right now, you know, and I know many of you out there are doing these types of things, but Lego and NFL and Marriott, and looking at what others are doing will also help you kind of think through your strategy as well. So,
and you know, some of the places you can look for examples, if you're not following Ad Age or following Ad Week, those are definitely some good places to go where you'll see some of the things that are happening out there real time as they're happening to help build those ideas as well.
Okay, and the next slide, you know, again, we've been pressing on this, but content matters, you know. Melissa, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about this and just the impact that content we're seeing right now and how people are engaging.
Yeah, you know, you're seeing 33% of posts are related to coronavirus, but they're related to coronavirus, not necessarily about coronavirus. You know, more articles are coming out, which are driving higher engagement. You know, for example, Kara was talking about Rent the Runway and what they're doing. You know, what are the behaviors that are happening that are driving that content? And it's waist up, you know, conferencing. So, you know, is there something that, you know, your products or services can do that can help you get in that conversation? You know, remote working was up 3 times in searches. So think again about what is happening, what's the content, you know, how can you engage in that conversation and be a part of it in an authentic way, you know, through helping. And again, we can't talk about content enough to be able to understand how and where you play in that.
You know, we talk about LinkedIn right now. They're probably one of the social medias that are actually down in terms of in certain areas, but as far as content engagement, they've seen a significant increase. So I think just remembering that is so important in what we're doing all the time, COVID or not. And the next slide. again, Melissa, do you want to talk to this page a little bit?
Sure.
And
I mean,
I can give
this
some
really
examples.
Yeah, I think this just kind of recaps a little bit more of everything that we were saying, trying to put it down into one bucket, but using the data, understanding what's happening, and your audience, looking at your audience. Kara touched on 66 days to form a habit. Content consumption is up, so messaging is key. Focusing that messaging on the current situation that's authentic. Integrating testing, we can't emphasize now is a time as you look at things to test, optimize, control, look at testing various messages and creative, which one performed better, move forward with that one. What are the things right now as you're looking at content that you can be making sure moving forward, you understand what works. Look at all aspects of your budget. As Kara mentioned at the top, don't plan it and, set it and forget it. Like we say that all the time. You need to be in there looking at it, test new platforms, test Twitter. If you're not on LinkedIn and B2B is important to you, start to test it, start to build an audience there. Your website, if you don't have one, if your business has been set where, Facebook allowed you to do it, look at setting up a website, look at your website, what is the content you have on there? Is it relevant? Are there things you can do? Carol talked about landing pages earlier on. Are there certain things that you can do there that as you're putting these ads out and testing it, you can also look at which ads through tracking are the ones that are driving that conversion to your website. E-commerce, if it's relevant or could have helped and you didn't have it, how quickly could you get it? There's a lot of, dependent upon how your website is built, there's a lot of different plugins on the backside. In the retail and restaurant environment, this has been critical for those that are figuring out how to succeed.
I think from an example standpoint in that restaurant, I don't think we have a lot of restaurants on the call today, but I think one thing, that we've seen is that those that were planned and prepared were able to move quicker for this crisis. They were able to, if they had a website or had some form of an online presence, they were able to more quickly look at how do they adapt for takeout and delivery, how do they move their business categories. We talked about moving to grocery with restaurant and using your wholesale advantage to help others and help yourself. I think those are all important things we see happening. Those that were prepared are able to move and flex faster. And I think that's really important part of it. And use your resources. There's a lot of, like the chamber, like other organizations out there, they're there to help. They're there for resources. Don't be afraid to ask, for help, or look to others to see what they're doing and what's working for them in your business sector. I think it's really important to come together and really work together. I think leveraging those partnerships and coming together and uniting as a community is important. And we've seen a lot of that happening, and we hope that stays and continues to be reflective in how business is done. I think that's been a great thing from this that we can take away as a positive.
Ladies, we did have a question come in, which I think is pretty applicable. It says, if you are a workout facility or gymnastics, or I think this would even apply to any place that is asking people to come to their location, so restaurants, retail, movie theaters, etc. What is your communication advice to make our clients feel comfortable to come back to the facility? Is assuring them of our game plan once we do open, having multiple sanitizing stations, cleaning plants, etc. enough?
Yeah, I think transparency is going to be key. I think really making sure that you are putting their mind at ease of what they're doing. And then I think as they do come back, it's going to be critical that they see you doing it, right? So as a gym or facility, do they see you sanitizing those items? I'll give my own example of my hairdresser. Right before everything was shut down with COVID, I had my hair cut, and it was days before we were shut down. As I got up to leave, she took out a can of, sanitizer, not just any, it was clearly an industrial type of sanitizer, and she was spraying everything down. So I think I feel comfortable going back to her when things reopen because I saw how conscious she was. So I think letting your customers see it, I think getting your customers who do come back to help engage and leveraging them on your social media to talk about how safe and secure they feel as well. You know, you probably have those influencers as part of your organization that can help reiterate that message. So it's not just you saying it, but the transparency of what you're doing is going to be the most critical thing to do there.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also think we're seeing a lot of, you know, at a lot of fitness centers even doing at home, having at home programs, you know, live at home, where they've had some of their fitness instructors be doing at certain times of the day health and wellness activities that you can participate in, whether it's spinning from home or an aerobic workout or yoga. We're seeing a lot of that happening, and even though their place is closed, they're still providing the services. And I think that is, you know, also a really important thing to be keeping in mind is how can you translate what you're doing in you know, in your own space to the online component.
Yeah, and one more thing, you know, on that whole, you know, because obviously, to Kara's point, the fitness center I go to, they're doing that. So I have the opportunity to go do live workouts with them, or they're recorded. I can go do them if I can't do it at the time that it's live. But the other thing that they did was they reached out to me. They actually called me last week to see how am I doing, have I taken the workout. So stay connected with them through this. Make sure that you're reaching out to them now, that they'll also come, you know, make sure that there's that the relationship is important there.
Yeah, relation management, I think I talked about it on a slide before. Your customers and your employees are your biggest assets, and making sure they're that you're communicating with them is critical. So, you know, I think that's really important, and there's so many different ways to communicate with them, as long as you know who they are. I think that's, you know, I think the last slide is really just, again, about planning and benchmarking. You know, I think we talked about a lot of testing and using this time to test different platforms that you may have not been familiar with, but making sure you have benchmarks, that you know what you're looking for from that test, and that you are, you know, looking at that analytically against what you've had in the past. And so I think it's really important to have benchmarks all the time when you start programs or new programs.
And wordstream.com is a great place to go if you've never looked at benchmarks. They break them by industry, so you can find your industry and understand benchmarks performance based on your industry. So if you've never gone there, I would suggest you go there and start to understand your business when you are doing advertising and how you should be performing against what you're doing.
You know, we just want to thank everybody. I think our time has come to an end, but again, please feel free to reach out to us with any questions you might have. And I know Matt will be sending the presentation.
I will, and I'll include your email addresses as well. With that, thank you again. I believe somebody just said thank you. I thought we had another question. So ladies, thank you again so much for sharing your time, your expertise, and for sponsoring this. We really do appreciate it. Everyone, I can't say enough good things about DCC Marketing. They do a phenomenal job, as you can see. So please go to their website, reach out, and yes, thank you. Great job.
Just stay well.
Yeah, stay safe and healthy.
Yep.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.